Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Meredith Rosenberg. I'm co-founder of New Advisory Partners, which is an executive search firm. My specialty is EdTech, education, and all things related to talent. I'm really delighted to have all of you today, as well as these amazing individuals on our panel, focused on breaking barriers. We have Sunil Gunderia from Age of Learning, Matt Greenfield, Rethink Education, Jenny Lay-Flurrie from Microsoft, and Mariella Satow. We are going to have a 40-minute conversation. We have many topics to focus on, but all of these individuals are creators and builders, and I'm excited to dive into the topics that we talked about when we were prepping for the panel, really focused on disability, inclusion, accessibility, and how do we create organizations that are that have accessibility at its core. The topics that we thought we would center on today really focus on three main areas: product, investment, and talent and workforce, all related again to accessibility and broadening the funnel to bring people with disabilities into the workforce, create products that are more accessible, and really just promote innovation for everyone. So with that context, oh, and I should say that we may have time for questions, so we will see how the conversation flows, but all of us are open to individual discussions afterwards in the hallway. So with that, some of the things that we had talked about, Sunil, particularly you and I, before as we were prepping for the panel, is that there's a very clear connection between early education and the skills that people need in the workforce. We talked particularly with this as it relates to reading, and also that accessibility should be at the core of any product creation, because that is really key for promoting innovation. So one of the first questions that I have for you, Sunil, and we'll start off, is how do we make learning easier for students? And very specifically, if you were not to talk about AI, because everybody's talking about AI, if you were not to talk about AI, what would you tell me?
So Meredith, the conversation starts with double-clicking on the word barriers. And you look at what is something fundamental that all our students and all of our workforce needs, we all need as humans, is the ability to read. And you see that from, our public education systems, which are meant to improve accessibility and allow the American dream to exist, are unfortunately not delivering for the majority of our students. Talk two specific factors. If you're from a low-income family, which is now 50% of the US population is from a low-income family, 80% of those students, according to our national report card, by the time they're in 4th grade, are not proficient in reading. If you look at it from a perspective of students with IAPs, which are 15% of our students in schools, 90% of those students are not proficient in reading by the time they're in 4th grade. And you're not proficient in reading, you're 4 times likely to drop out of high school and make 30% less across your lifetime. So the impetus for investment in doing this right and ensuring accessibility for all of our populations is really clear. And as a company, we're absolutely focused on what is the future of education, and we've already started, so AI is not new, it's 40 plus years old.
About AI.
Well, sorry?
You're not allowed to talk about AI.
Okay. All right, we won't. We did it with the promise of AI that was coming.
I told you, not AI.
Yeah. And the opportunity is to personalize education for all students, regardless of the barrier they may have in terms of their ability to learn. And we think we have the systems and the tools to do that. And the way you do that and ensure it's happening is you gather evidence, and Age of Learning has done that. We have 19 studies that show that our products, our math and reading products, work for students, help them get to proficiency and accelerate learning. And we're very close to having our first research results that are going to show that we can help students with IEPs also achieve proficiency in reading.
Yeah, thank you. Mariella, your company, and an amazing entrepreneur that you are, where you just started this in the pandemic a few years ago, your company very specifically focuses on this demographic that Age of Learning does as well too, students that or children, I should say, that don't necessarily know how to read, and you've created this amazing solution. For you, what have been the biggest barriers to creating this company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we face a lot of the same challenges as Sunil. I think even more so with the community we serve, which is the deaf community, and the stats there are just kind of even worse. The average age of fluency for reading is 13 or 14 for a deaf child. So I think a big barrier for us is just getting kids access to content at all. You know, they can't access it in English. Closed captions are too fast, or they haven't learned how to read yet. They need that sign language access. So,
thank you. Jenny, in your role as Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft, you told me that you focus on building products very specifically for disabled employees. How do you get people to think about this every day? So creating accessible products is not just a side hustle, it's not just an afterthought, it is really central, and particularly to Microsoft, but generally.
Well, thanks for having us. You know, disability is kind of all around us, so let's just get that out of the way. It is, in America, 26% of the population. It is majority what you can't see. You wouldn't know that I'm deaf. You just think I'm British and rather sassy. I can't hear you. You all sound like George Clooney, and that was the way when I was a kid, right? And I'm one of what we know of 9% of Microsoft's employees that have already said, yes, I have a disability. We train every single one of our employees. 210,000 of our employees have all taken accessibility training. I actively go and hire disabled people. Why? Because we want to build products that actually work for humans. And disability is part of the human experience. So for us, it would be rather candidly stupid if we didn't embed accessibility and disability into the fabric of what we do. And bluntly, we would be building technology that wouldn't work for a quarter of the population. And I think the other one we've really got to wallow in here, because I love the word wallow, is the fact that if you build with and for disability, you actually build technology that works for all. Who here listens to audiobooks? That's most hands. I don't. Truth. Who uses closed captions on videos? Who uses door handles? They all came from accessibility, folks, right? They all came from designing with and for disabled people. So we've got to get accessibility better in our schools.
So I have a vision disability, and so like you just said, people don't know you're deaf. People don't know that I am legally blind and I cannot see. And so as someone who has been in the school system before the ADA came out, and then also now as someone who's worked for far too long and hopefully not going to be working my whole life, and also now as a co-founder of a new company, that point about how do we build accessibility into the organization's DNA just fundamentally resonates with me. Matt, I'd love to hear your perspective as an investor and who's been an investor in the edtech space for a very long time. How do you, what are you seeing in terms of companies that are focusing on accessibility? Do you find that is an afterthought? What does the pipeline look like? How do you think about your investment thesis? I'd love to hear that topic. Particularly, I would say, as venture investing in edtech has been down now.
90%.
90%.
Yeah, 90% year over year.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have this job because of a company focused on the neurodivergent. So, you know, I made 2 key investments before 2010, and one was in what is now Amplify, which was focused on literacy assessment, the Dibbles test, and the other one, which I co-founded, is Rethink First, formerly known as Rethink Autism, which today has $110 million in recurring revenue and is, you know, a very impactful and innovative company. I ended up founding it through a series of lucky accidents, but I did sort of identify an opportunity. I was actually talking to the autism specialist. Anyway, I won't belabor that. Yeah, there are basically 2 kinds of people in the United States. You said 26% have identified disabilities of some kind. Many of the rest have unidentified or, you know, sort of emergent disabilities. but all of us are eventually going to have cognitive or physical disabilities unless we die prematurely. I think a lot about the elderly as well. I think it is often a bolt-on afterthought. You know, you design the curriculum and then you figure out how to add accessibility for people with hearing or vision difficulties, and that's wrong. And I just want to give you a brief anecdote about the daughter of someone I know who's been diagnosed with ADHD, and a pretty severe case in ordinary terms. He was trying to read her a story one night because she didn't like to read to herself. And it wasn't stimulating enough for her, so she got up and started dancing around the room and moving while she listened. And then she turned on Alexa and asked Alexa to tell her a story. And at first, my friend was deeply hurt. Like, why does she want Alexa to tell her a story and not me? And then he realized, oh no, she's listening to both stories. And I had a debate with a cognitive scientist about whether she was really fully processing both stories, but she was clearly listening to both on some level. And that was the moment in which she realized that her disability was also a superpower. And I've been thinking ever since I heard that anecdote, not just what kind of curriculum, what kind of accessibility overlay on the curriculum do you need, but what kind of school would work for her?
Yeah, so really creating a school, and I think we had also, all of us talked about a workplace, right, that is accessible and enables people with disabilities, whether that is neurodivergent, physical, others, to really thrive, be happy, and be most productive. Yeah. Jenny, what have you seen at Microsoft in terms of that?
It's definitely changed a lot over the years. So I joined in 2005 to work on a product which many people probably won't remember, called Hotmail. And I didn't join to work on accessibility and didn't honestly self-identify. And I think a lot of the social stigma associated not just with deafness, but with disability as a whole is a very real thing. And people come to a company, Microsoft is one of many, and not necessarily seeing their disability as we view it, and I later learned, which is it's a strength, it's an asset, it's a talent pool, it's an expertise. And our job as one company is to empower that expertise. So that means that we offer accommodations, or what's legally termed reasonable accommodations, to empower any individual, whether they have autism, they use a wheelchair, they have mental health condition, whatever it may be. Our job is to help empower that individual. So I'm here with my sign language interpreter. I use captioning on my Windows because you just turn it on and it's powered because I can't hear you by AI. And you see, I can mention
We can talk about AI.
I think that's the third deaf joke. I'm done. But I think if I look over time, what we've found is that majority of those accommodations are very, very small. Average cost around $50. In fact, we've had a neurodiverse hiring program since 2015, which is where we absolutely go after neurodiverse talent because they have very high skills in science, technology, engineering, and math. We do not interview in the classic way. We actually do a week-long Minecraft virtual academy. It is the coolest hiring program we have. We've hired many folks. They've gone into 12 different divisions. They all argue because they all want to go into Xbox. But what is the average accommodation for that talent pool? It's three things. One, a set of soundproof headset, the Bose headphones. That's number one. Two, a good position in the office or to work from home. And three is clear expectation settings. When I'm going into a meeting, I know what the agenda is. I know what the actions are. By the way, every manager that's hired one of this talent pool has come back to us and said they want more because it's made them a better manager. And so I think it's kind of breaking down those barriers and those fallacies, bluntly, that disabled people cost a lot. They're hard to cater for. Not true. Not true. We're obnoxious, we're loud, we have a lot to say, and we've got a lot that we can deliver on if given the chance to.
But those three things don't sound really different than what you would give any employee, right? So clear expectations, flexibility to work from home, and give them the right tools, right? So maybe the tools are headphones, maybe it's the right computer, maybe it's the right printer. It could be anything, but again, that sounds very similar, with maybe execution is slightly different, but similar parameters that you give any employee.
And that's the thing. I think what you've got to do, though, is you've got to create an environment where disability is viewed as a strength, that there is trust, there is safety, and that people feel that they can ask for what they need to be successful. And that takes time. That's culture. An inclusive culture is not something that you can flick a light on and it's there. It has to start and it has to breed.
Yeah. Sorry, Matt. Go ahead.
Everyone needs an IEP. Every student, every worker. And it's kind of abusive the way the school system instead is so busy grading and testing the rest of the population, as opposed to taking responsibility for getting them to the level that they're capable of achieving.
To add, so some of the work that we can do as product developers, especially for young kids, and we try to do this with our core product, ABC Mouse, and with our learning process, My Math and My Reading Academy, is reflect these lived experiences of the very diverse population we have with a number of different disabilities, and reflect that in our stories and narratives that you exist, you're there, and this world is for you, and you can be as successful as anyone else. And being able to reflect that back to them is really important as we think about how we increase visibility to what has been historically invisible and stigmatized.
Yeah, I completely agree. SignUp has 300 interpreters who will create sign language interpretations for streaming and education, and the vast majority of them are deaf interpreters. And I think there's a huge misconception about deaf talent and disabled talent in general, that they're kind of subpar, but our users prefer deaf talent, and our users, the deaf kids, kind of respond more to deaf interpreters just because of the cultural aspect.
And Jenny, you had said that the programmers you have, I think it was the programmers or the engineers that you have, are blind, I think, is that what you had said? Just in terms of creating product, because then they're creating code and product that works just by the nature of who they are and how they create it. It works for the disabled population.
Yeah, maybe just to linger and punctuate what you said there, is because it's so important. Being able, as a deaf person, I'm a vocal, clearly, deaf person. I learned to speak as a young kid. I lost my hearing through measles, but my voice is my first language. For most deaf kids, sign is their language. And so providing sign content to a child is the difference between having language or not. We are forcing deaf kids to learn written when actually their language is. So I just have to applaud this one on my left for the work that she's doing. That is so important. And yet, I think it is so important. One of the points you made, I think earlier, Sunil, is that we hit it too late. Accessibility, you kind of write your document and then you have to make it accessible, or you write a video and you have to put the captions on, and oh, panic, I've got somebody coming in the room who might need these things. If you build it in by design, and you actually include it as part of building your document, your teacher prep, your piece of code, whatever it is, the cost of doing accessibility is minuscule. And the easiest sort of analogy there is just, you think about building a ramp to an event. You can't do that just beforehand. No wheelchair would go on a cardboard ramp. You have to build it in by design. And so, we actively go after blind developers. They are the best at building accessible code. They use screen readers to read what's on the screen. They're writing in the accessible prompts into the HTML just by writing that code. And so, blind developers are gold dust to us. We really, really hunt them. And we also hunt a lot of deaf talent as well, because we're building captioning into all of our products. Microsoft Teams and sign language view is something in that we use for deaf talent using, just normal communications platform. That was all created by a deaf engineer. So yes, the better products are always going to be designed by those who use them every day.
Thank you. Yeah, and the point about culture that you were saying before is really what you just put a fine point on, is that creating an organization where accessibility is just the way of doing business, not oh, I have people coming to my event, how do I wrap that around? Yeah. And so often we don't see that, so I work with nonprofit as well as private sector companies, and I can tell you that those that think about accessibility from the very beginning, they're much better able to attract and retain top talent. And that is the way to make or break the success of a company. Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt.
As you were saying before, there is a strong correlation between mathematical and scientific ability on the one hand and autism spectrum disorder on the other. And so a lot of the companies that are most profitable and have the highest promise, I won't mention AI, but
AI-free zone.
Yeah. But tech companies, as well as finance companies, have a disproportionate number of people who are on the spectrum, diagnosed or not. And so any organization that isn't thinking about how to be inclusive and make the workplace friendly for them is going to be at a serious disadvantage.
As a recent co-founder, our company is a year old. I could tell you I could not agree with you more. Yes. So just on that point, though, are you seeing other investors pick up this mantle and say, yes, we really have this as an investment thesis, we're really focusing on this population, these kinds of technologies?
There are a couple of relatively small funds specifically focused on neurodivergence. I don't know of any focused on physical disabilities in particular. The generalists seem to get indicated when they see something with very rapid growth, like, I guess, marker learning. They're a small number. I think for anyone interested in K-12 companies right now, as we approach the pandemic funding cliff, inclusiveness and disability-related products are one of the few safe areas because the school districts are required to serve them.
And have you seen, though, with all the companies and technologies that are out there, because there are a fair number, are they really rooted in learning outcomes? Have you seen that tie? Because I've seen yes and no. A lot of great technologies not necessarily tied to learning outcomes, learning focus.
Well, I think that the majority of education companies out there have a weak theory of pedagogy for everyone, right? My firm was founded in 2012, which is the year of the MOOC, when people thought that watching a video of someone teaching a class and then answering a quiz would be a substitute for college. And there's still a lot of that out there, and under recognition of the importance of human conversation and collaboration.
Sunil, you have a rebuttal?
We're not in the majority then, and happily not in the majority. We backward design from how do we use learning science to solve a problem, solving problems around proficiency in reading and math for those populations, for all populations, and certainly those furthest from opportunity, was our guiding principle as we started developing. We went through iteration cycles to achieve that, and as I mentioned before, you got to be evidence-driven. I mean, we are only going to see the unlocking of our population in terms of what is going to be a potential to be amazing future for all. But we have to start early, and we have to focus in on what's important. And I think being outcome-based in terms of our approach as product companies is really key to unlocking that future.
Switching topics just slightly, although related, I know, Mariella, when we were talking earlier, you had said that it's been a challenge to attract capital and investors. And I would love to hear more about that. And Matt, I'd love to hear your answer to why that is.
Yeah, definitely.
Speaking for all investors.
There has been kind of an issue with convincing VC funds and individual investors that disability and accessibility is something to invest in. A lot of my meetings have kind of ended with the fund or individuals saying, why don't you turn this into a charity, a nonprofit, 501c3? They don't see value in investing in it. And I think the same with our customers, with streaming platforms and education platforms. They see accessibility as kind of a nice add-on, but not a necessity. And our kind of mantra is signing as a language, not an accommodation. So I think that's been a challenge with raising funds, and a lot of our current investors have a personal connection to deafness or disability, which is disappointing, but we're trying to change that. But Matt, I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, tell us.
Well, I don't know very much about your companies, but yeah, there's a lot of caution among venture capitalists right now. In particular, I think the uncertainty of the funding situation in K-12, the fact that thanks to the bungling of the rollout of the new FAFSA, colleges are about to experience catastrophic declines in enrollment. Large corporations have become a little bit more cautious about hiring, even though the labor market remains tight. Spending on hiring-related technologies has gone down. So it's understandable that venture capitalists have become more cautious. They also have a preference for pure software solutions that don't have a services component in general for margin-related reasons. So those could be some of the factors. But also they don't like things that are different in general.
Which feels opposite the theme of this panel. So Jenny, I love your perspective. You work at one of the largest tech companies in the world that clearly is focused on this. So how do we reconcile that, where we don't necessarily have funds that are flowing in to support companies that focus on accessibility and disability, yet Microsoft has really led the way in that world?
It's hard to hear, isn't it? Okay, that wasn't a deaf joke. But I really think it is, because the reality is that there are legal things that we all need to wallow in here, right? Accessibility isn't something that's optional. Let's get that out the way. The ADA is here for a reason. Even last week, there were some landmark rulings on the applicability of ADA in the digital environment. This isn't optional. And I have to say that, by the way, not just as a technologist, but as a mom. I'm a mom of 4. 2 of my younger kids, youngest being 16, are both autistic. I'm a deaf mom. I will say that in the school district that I'm in, I'm known. But in my 3, you don't laugh too much.
Surprising.
But in the 3 years that my daughter's been in high school so far, they've not once provided an ASL interpreter for her IEPs. Not once. Now, we're going to fix that, trust me. But these things are still not being adhered to. The law is still not being followed. And then you look at the principles of inclusion, which denote that if you have captioning on a video, people are more likely to watch it. In fact, 3 times more likely to watch it if there are captions on that video. If you have a low vision or blind kid, they no longer need to be taken out. Technology can enable that child to stay in the room. All you have to do, by the way, if you're in Office, is just go to Accessibility Checker. It's right next to Spell Check. And that is to fix any accessibility issues in your documents. And we put it there so that you would be able to find it every single time. We're trying to make it discoverable, easy, not just to benefit the disabled child, the mom, the dad, the educator, but actually to benefit everyone, right? So I do find it very hard to hear this, because I will tell you that big tech is going the other way. We are investing heavily in this area. In fact, generative AI does have, I said generative before the AI, so I'm hoping that gets me in, does have some huge and profound implications for accessibility and inclusion and just blowing the doors off some of what we can do with technology. My team is literally full of disabled talent. It is a just wild and wonderful team back in Seattle. I have blind, I have deaf, I have wheelchairs, I have everything. Our team meetings are all built on Microsoft Teams and Word and PowerPoint and all these wonderful, lovely things that we speak. And now generative AI means that I don't just get captions, I get a transcript and I get meeting notes. I get images with rich 4-paragraph deep descriptions. So if I put a picture in the chat window, my blind colleagues know exactly what that picture is. I don't have to do any additional work. It's going to change the future. So I guess I would say get on the bus. I really do think we should get on the bus and be investing in firms like this one that is investing in the future.
So if there are any investors in the audience,
hint,
you
hint.
just heard from Microsoft saying invest in this one, be in the hallway afterwards. So Sunil, do you want to talk about AI now?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Finally.
Just ignored it.
I appreciate it. You broke the barrier there. Thank you.
I tried.
It is the panel title.
So the opportunity with AI. So we're a partner with all here on the LAUSD rollout. And you think about the wider lens of accessibility. 86% of the students in LAUSD are from low-income families. Many of those families will have, not the child themselves may have an IEP, the parent at home may have access issues, whether it just be language. There's over 100 heritage languages in LAUSD at home. So with AI and things like what LAUSD is doing, and how we think about things in terms of when we look at the future and the opportunity to have technology adapt to the human, rather than the human have to adapt to the technology, and we can do the same with our learning and our learning platforms. Not only can we do it for the student, we can now use technology like AI to do it for the teacher so that they can drive instructional strategies for every student in the class based on what the data is telling them and based on what they know about the student, their IEP status, their socioeconomic status, and then serve the parent through multiple, 100 different languages, their heritage languages home. And if Mariella has anything to do with it, if they need to be assigned to, then that can happen as well with technology, just as easily.
Thank you. You were holding that back. Thank you.
So I'm an investor in that company all here that partnered with LAUSD. Yeah. And I will just parenthetically note that the founder, Joanna Smith Griffin, is neurodivergent. She's a stutterer. And I think that was part of why she was just completely overlooked by the venture capital industry for quite a long time.
So these students that are in the schools now that we're talking about, these founders, again, I know that you are recently entering college, but eventually we will move into, this population is going to be our future workforce. And so how do we continue to get them into the workforce? So if we're taking care of them, Sunil, you mentioned the products at Age of Learning. But if we are taking care of them now in their early formative years, they graduate from school, they go into workplaces, how do we ensure there is continuity? So how do we focus on getting this particular talent demographic into the workplace? And again, something that I think about, again, as a recruiter, very specifically about, focused on diverse talent, new kinds of talent that have been really overlooked previously. Do you want to answer, Jenny?
Well, I do think there's a lot of components. There's kind of, I would say, some soft skills and some hard skills. On the soft skills, I would love for kids to be seeing their disability as a part of their human and not something to be shy about, but be forward in their identity, inclusive of their disability. I had a question a couple of days ago, which is, well, do you hide your deafness? And I was like, no, no, I don't. I'm a proud, deaf, disabled woman. And I don't just say that for my own benefit. And by the way, it's taken me a long time to say that, right? This is definitely a case of do what I say now, not what I did. It's taken me a long time to get to there. But when you see kids coming into the workplace, coming out of college, and they're shy about it, they don't know how to self-advocate, don't know to ask for what they need to be successful, we're with you on that journey, but it takes longer, right? It can really take a little bit and a heartbeat to get you to where you need to be. So you know what tools, which comes me to, when we interview kids coming in, kids because they're just younger than me, which is majority of the population coming up, but when they're coming in for interview, we no longer ask kids to sit there and use a Microsoft PC. We say, come with whatever you have. I don't care if it's Android, Fruity, I don't care. Come with what you know, come with what you're used to, and show us your skills. And so spend the time to invest and do that while you're at school. Learn how to use, if you're blind, a screen reader, which is and should be part of the curriculum. Learn how to make things and add captioning and use all of the things that are in every single phone and device that's out there now. So when you start to go for these jobs, you're really confident and you're not worried about how you're going to navigate an interview environment. You're worried about how you're going to answer the question. And so soft and hard skills, I think, are really important. But what would I love more than anything else? I want accessibility taught in school. We are having to teach that as people enter the workplace. It is not today a part of any computer science curriculum in this country. That's a failure.
That is surprising.
Yep.
I'm very surprised to hear that. So if that's maybe your one word of wisdom to the school districts, which is build accessibility into the curriculum, Mariella, what advice would you have if you could say one thing to the teachers of your current customers, which are parents and students? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think the fact that what's on offer is closed captions, which are in English, it's just telling deaf kids that sign language isn't a legitimate language. And I think it really affects deaf children's confidence when they don't see sign language kind of mainstreamed. And that's the kind of main piece of feedback we get back. Deaf kids have been able to be in mainstream classrooms because of sign language access. And they can learn alongside, mainstream kids, which is huge. And I think with that sign language access comes, greater confidence and, more success in the workforce.
Thank you. Matt, as someone who said before you think everybody should have an IEP, what would your one advice be or directive be to schools of today?
Well, I've thought a lot about how schools could be transformed into institutions that are more centered on the needs of students rather than imposing a set of very alienating requirements on them. And I think the simplest piece of advice I have is just to eliminate grades.
Thank you. And Sunil, last thoughts?
I'd build on what Matt's saying in terms of how we look at education. It's about mastering skills and not about grades. And the transformation that we are hoping that can happen with the technology and tools that we now have available should be about treating each child as an individual versus a cohort that is expected to learn the same thing within a calendar year or 180 days. Like, we need to recognize and accept that we are human, and being human means that we are not average. And working on the margins and solving for that is how we ensure that we as humans will continue to flourish.
I think everyone obviously should be taught how to read, if that's at all possible. And there are certain things that are basic requirements for the rest of the curriculum. if you don't know how to multiply and divide negative numbers, you can't graph linear equations, and so on. So think about how crazy it is that you do that unit as a group, you administer a test, one student gets an F, one student gets a C, one student gets an A, and then they all move on to the next topic. And by the way, the student who got the A may not deeply understand the topic either, because we're not focused on deep mastery of the most important topics. We're instead focused on coverage. And I'll further note, we haven't talked about trauma, which is related to disabilities, but, oh, sorry, I see we're running out of time.
No, so what I would say is let's keep talking about that, but let's do it in the hallway because our panel is over. So thank you all so much. Really rich discussion. Thank you all. Thank you.